بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
إن الدين عند الله الإسلام.
Bismillah, we're back. You're watching Way of the Muslim, defining the Muslim's character. We've been talking on some of the issues that face us every day and the advice given to us on how to deal with these problems by our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam 1400 years ago. Some of the hadith that we discussed dealt with the issues of those who would be rulers over us not having the knowledge of Islam, acting according to what they had, which would be against the right teachings, and then what should be our response. What we gained in knowledge from these hadith, or teachings of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that we have to be steadfast, very much so, in doing what? And giving allegiance and obedience to those who are in authority, in as much as they are doing what is right, but avoiding doing what they would order you to do, which is wrong. And this makes sense, because the Quran teaches this even in specific cases, not to mention the general case. If you look to Surah Al-Luqman, for instance, chapter 31, in the Quran, when you find that the man who is having this wisdom from Allah, entreating his son, and he's telling his son how to behave. And this is good advice, because it says in here, you obey your parents, except what? Except in the areas where they would have you worship other than Allah. To worship something you have no knowledge of. And that's the meaning here. You obey, but to what extent? I want to make real clear on this, because after coming into Islam, I observed a lot of things, the actions, difficulties, and the brotherhood as well of the Muslims. But I noticed that there is this problem that when there's some authority, when the emir says something, immediately there are a few who want to go against that and say something different, just because they don't like the emir. Never mind what the statement was. No, they just generalize and say, well, you know, he's not really on the right Islam, so therefore we're not going to even listen to this guy. And this is not correct. This is not the right way. Because we cannot contribute to a society that we abandon. We cannot benefit the people around us by taking what we have, which we assume to be correct, and then abandoning everybody, going away from everybody, leaving everybody, and then we're not helping. Even in the case where Aisha was talking, radiallahu anha, was talking about the Prophet ﷺ, in the one hadith we talked about, where the man came in wanted to speak to the Prophet. Yet she knew that this was a bad man, and yet how polite was the Prophet ﷺ in dealing with this person. And afterwards she's asking, even though this is a really bad guy, you still gave him this dignity, this honor, this respect, the polite treatment, and trying to figure out, you know, you yourself said he wasn't any good, so but you still treat him good. Why? And so it shows that even though somebody is really in the wrong way, the bad way, we do not have the right to just cut them off, walk away from them, if we have something to benefit. If we can benefit them, then we have to try our best to provide this. If they take some good, then that's good, but if they refuse, well, that's their choice. But now there's another fine line here we don't want to cross either. We don't want to join them in what they're doing, because the Prophet ﷺ made it clear in the other hadith, whoever strengthens them or supports them and gives credibility to what they're doing, then they're joining them. They're going to destroy themselves and destroy the deen as well. So all of this is leading us up to the conclusion that there's a balance. There's a real nice balance in Islam. When you see evil, of course we have to be against it. The Quran is replete with these types of admonitions to us to call the people to the right way and to forbid what is evil. This statement is repeated a number of times, especially if you read in Surah Al-Imran, chapter 3, verse 110. This is very close to the meaning when it says that you are the best of people raised up, because you call the people to al-maruf and you forbid the munkar, wa tu'minuna billah, and you believe in Allah. But be careful that you pay close attention to this, and this is not the whole ayah. This is not the whole verse. Many people stop with that. But here, first, we need to define this meaning of maruf and munkar. Maruf in this case is anything good that calls to Allah, that brings us closer to La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And evil is something which would take people away from that in this verse. The reason we say that is because the scholars have told us that in this case, Maruf and Munkar is dealing with something specific, because the juxtaposition of the wording, when you see then it says, what tu'minun billah, coming after these two actions. When we asked the scholars about that, they said this is specific for this ayah, because it means if you're not willing to call the people to what is right and righteous, and you're not willing to forbid those things which were evil and hated by Allah, then how can you say, I believe in Allah? But now let us continue with that ayah and look a little bit closer to that. Because it continues and it says, and if the people of the book had believed, it would have been better for them. Verily, from them are believers, but you'll find most of them are fasiqun, those who are disobedient to Allah. I want to specifically mention that because I hear so many times today people saying that, from the Ahlul Kitab, the people of the book, are not the same today as they were back then. These are all kuffar and they are so-and-so infidels. This is not true. That is not the meaning. That is not what's in the Quran. And I think really and truly, if we take time to think about this and look at it, we'll realize that to stay in balance with what Islam is teaching is clear. Whoever believes in Allah, that He is one, without partners, and they're trying their best to worship Him and obey Him, acting on what they know. Now specifically, we've been talking about that in this program. Acting upon what they know to the best of their ability. It's up to Allah to be their judge. And it's not up to me or to you or anybody else to say that Allah is never going to forgive this person. We learned that from the first hadith we started with. And now let's take this one and see what we come up with. This is, by the way, on the authority of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and he said, how will you be when you are covered by a trial in which the young grow up and the old become infirm, and if anything of it is abandoned, it's said the sunnah has been abandoned. And it was said, when is this going to occur? And they're asking him. He says, it's going to be when your scholars pass away and the ignorant amongst you become many, when those who recite amongst you are many, but those who have understanding of the religion are few. When your leaders are many, but those who are trustworthy are few. When this world is sought with actions of the hereafter, and when knowledge is sought for other than the religion. This is not a hadith, by the way, this is a saying of one of the most trusted companions of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's a teaching of one of the great teachers of Islam, who of course memorized the entire Quran and relates to us many of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But he's telling us this not of his own volition. He's telling you very clear, these are prophecies. And we find these mentioned in other books as well, but it's summed here very well. He's asking, what are you going to do during the time of this great fitna when it comes? And they're saying, oh, what fitna are we talking about here? And he says it's going to occur when the scholars pass away. And that's strange because, really in recent years I've seen some of the top scholars of Islam, wonderful teachers of Islam, the people who I look up to myself, and they're dying. Several died all in the same year, in 1999. But in any case, and it says, and the ignorant will be many, and we have so many people today ignorant of Islam. And I'm not talking about the people that are not Muslim. I'm talking about Muslims themselves having so much ignorance, speaking on what they don't know. And look how it continues. It says, and when those who recite, this is talking about the Quran. The people who recite the Quran are going to be many. And we do have that. By the way, we have millions, tens of millions of people living today on this earth, walking and breathing, who have memorized the whole Quran cover to cover. Every single harf, every word, every letter of the Quran, they can recite the whole thing for you. But, and look at what he says, but those who are doing this have very little understanding, except for a few. Except for a few who really understand what they're reciting. And is that true? Well, I'm not going to mention which countries because I don't want to make anybody mad at us. But in fact, it's very true, specifically in some of the countries where they insist on memorize the Quran, but they don't take the trouble to go to the deep meanings and the beauty of the Quran. And this is something that's actually happened. And it says that when your leaders are many, well, there was only one leader of Islam at the time of Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in successive rulers, as we heard in some of the other hadiths in this program earlier, there would be those who would be in the right way. It still was only one at a time. But then as the Muslims began to divide up into different continents, different nations, we find different leaders. Until today, we have so many Muslim countries with so many different leaders. Again, that's what it says right here. Leaders are many, but those that are trustworthy are few. And when this world is sought with actions of the hereafter, meaning here, now let me clarify that. Well, this is when somebody is going after the hereafter and at the same time using that as a way to finance themselves here. Again, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings or say something, just a general statement, but I found myself personally doing the dawah, going out and calling myself and my friends and people to Islam, that if I use any type of financial gain out of this thing, then what's going to happen? It destroys it. It takes away the beauty and the barakah of Islam. So it's essential for those people, especially like in my position, to go out strictly for the sake of Allah and not hoping for any kind of material gain whatsoever. Not even mentioning something like this, much less doing fundraising and all the rest of it for their projects. Because in that could be this thing where a person winds up doing what? They wind up looking for the material wealth and pulling something out of that. And that's a very good point. And then telling us that knowledge is sought for other than religion. We spoke about that in one of our other programs on this subject of developing the Muslim character, that what happens is that sometimes people are trying to get knowledge just so they can do one-upmanship. My knowledge is better than your knowledge, but who has all knowledge? Allah Azim. Allah is having all the knowledge. He is Al-Alim. And He tells us in the Quran, يَعْلَمُ مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَمَا خَلْفَهُمْ وَاللَّهُ يُحِيطُ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ عِلْمِهِ إِلَّا بِمَا شَاءَ. So you're not having any knowledge except what Allah gives you to start with. And how could I go into competition with somebody else of knowledge just to show them how much knowledge I have? And again, in another of our programs, we discuss more in detail, but I'll mention just this part of the hadith of Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he spoke about a person who would be brought on the day of judgment and asked, what did you do with the favors of Allah in this life? And he will say, oh Allah, I learned your book and taught it. In other words, he's saying he's an alim, and he had this knowledge, and he was a great teacher. And then we told him, no, you did it just so the people would say that you were a great teacher, or a great knowledgeable person, an alim. And you've gotten your reward. They said it. And then he would be dragged on his face into the hellfire. So from this we're understanding about keeping what we do, having a pure intention for Allah. To do what we do for the sake of Allah. I want to wind this particular one up by saying that it's only Allah who's the one going to guide us. And we need this guidance. We need Allah to open our hearts and our minds to these messages so that we can pull from this and we can make ourselves better Muslims and define our character so that these people, Muslim and non-Muslim, leaders and the common people alike, will realize this is the true Islam. And it's not going to come by just talking. It comes by our good actions and our good qualities. So let's make dua, Allah give us this guidance to have this kind of understanding and these good qualities. Ameen. And you've been watching The Way of the Muslim, Defining the Muslim Character. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.